Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. Even you, Joe. To interact with us, you can send questions and comments to the Facebook event page. While we're streaming live, hello Facebook land, and to YouTube land, hello and good evening to YouTube. As always, if you can't catch us live, chat replays are fun because you can see all the good conversations that happen that we can't get to, and of course you can always listen audio only on your favorite podcasting app. You know me, my name is John Ruark. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia, and coming all the way live from the Grand Annual Communication of the Grand Lodge of Virginia is one, the only, Joe Martinez. Hey, Joe.
Hello!
Hey!
It's a lot of Joe right in your face, yes.
All the Joe.
Joe Martinez, that's me. Let's see, I am still the Worshipful Master of Manassas Lodge number 182 in Manassas, Virginia. Also a Mason in many other places. And I am a voting delegate at our Grand Lodge. Yes, I get the magic card.
So explain that for a second. Explain that for a second
Yeah.
for those who don't know.
So here in Virginia, we're having our grand annual communication, right? So our annual meeting where we decide the things and do the things and elect new officers and whatnot. And here in Virginia, they still use a card balloting system. So anybody who's a delegate who can vote gets a card. And when they ask for people to vote on either a piece of legislation or on an officer or something like that, they will ask people to hold up their cards for yes or hold up their cards for no. Really super technologically advanced, but that is the way we do things here. Lots of other jurisdictions have electronic voting systems where you get little clickers like you do in Congress. Some people still use paper ballots where they still write things down. So everybody does it a little bit differently. But I'm super jazzed to be here. This is my first time coming as a voting delegate. So get to decide some things maybe, or at least just get to wave my card around in the air. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I want to say during my year that I was a voting delegate for my lodge, there was some, what do you call them? Not amendments, proposition,
resolution.
That's what it is. Was put on the table, and I could have sworn that there were more cards held up for yay than nay, but the nays had it. So I'm a big fan of actually counting instead of surveying the craft. But anyway, aside from that, next up for tonight's show, we have Robert Johnson. Hey, Robert.
Yay!
What's up? Wow, yeah, those stupid cards. Man, really, really pulls at my heartstrings, right? Like, how are you going to know if there's 2/3? You don't know. It's just like the sea of orange. They don't know. And when they got to go count manual ballots, who counts them? The Grand Lodge behind the curtain.
Right,
Nobody gets to see. Anyway, Robert Johnson, past Master Waukegan Lodge, 78, advocate against injustice and transparency.
Bring democracy back to Grand Lodge.
Man, no way. No way.
Sounds like a
current sitting secretary at Space Novum Lodge, number 1183, the premier education lodge in the state of Illinois. And happy to be with at least two of the other gents on this, wishing Jason Richards a speedy recovery.
Yeah,
get better soon.
He's still recovering from episode 400. We had a blast because here we are, episode 401, celebrated our 400th again back in South Carolina and North Carolina, South Carolina. Where were we?
We were in North Carolina.
We didn't make it all the way to
much different place than South Carolina. Yes.
And so yes, we got a lot of fun stuff lined up for the next 400. That's the cool part, right? We've had some time to rest and reflect. The least of which being, we always are in sync with our knights and squires of the show. So if you are not a supporter of the show and want to chat with us in the off season, certainly head over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable. Chip a few bucks in. We can nerd out about all sorts of Masonic stuff during the rest of the week in between these episodes. And one of our knights or squires, Michael West, I believe, said, hey, it's almost that time of year. He must already have his tree up, because he wanted to know if we're doing the 3rd annual Secret Masonic Santa. And the answer is yes, we are. So we dropped the link into the Knights and Squires. If you want to get set up early, we'll get a short URL by next week. So anyone can join. It's you don't have to be a Knight or Squire. You can just be an awesome supporter of the show in any way you can. Send it to your friends. It's a fun time, and we love doing it because it's just a good way to connect with brothers around the world, even when we're all
also
at a perpetual
like,
distance.
It's like I used to have this thing with a couple of my friends where you would buy something cool for each other, and then when life gets crazy busy, you just trade gift cards, and it's like, why the heck did we do that? That's so stupid.
I got you a $5 gift card too.
Oh yeah, like literally me got once. We exchanged $50 gift cards to Best Buy. Like it was the same design even. So the Elfster thing is really cool
But it's
because
much
you
more
don't
fun.
have any friggin' clue what you're gonna get, and it's really cool. Like you actually get something that comes from somebody who is thinking about you.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
And the last 2 years that we did it, I mean, I've gotten to meet and write letters and email and correspond with people that I had not spoken to before. Both of my previous Secret Santas, I guess, were people I'd not met before. So it was really fun. And to RJ's point, I got some really awesome stuff that was, one year was all handmade stuff. I was like blown away by it. I'm like, oh my God, this brother actually made all this stuff and sent it to me. It was absolutely amazing. So, yeah, like John said, even if you are not a Patreon or a Knight and Squire, partake. It's fun. It's always fun giving gifts to other people and making their day. So do it.
Mm-hmm.
Do it.
Do it. So yeah, so stay tuned to our social media. We'll send the link there, and we'll get a short URL for easy writing next week. And so we're going to introduce a new topic, a new part of the agenda, because Joe's making more noise than his rings right now. Click, click, click.
Yes.
We're going to introduce a new topic this week called the Tarot Card of the Week.
My cool
Couldn't have played
shuffling
that better.
right there.
Yeah.
I know, right? That was pretty good. Yeah, so we're gonna draw a card, and different people will be drawing a card each week. I'm gonna shuffle. We're gonna pretend this is The Price is Right and pray that we don't get the tower.
Yes.
Right?
No towers. No towers.
So,
big whammies.
Why does
No towers,
everybody
no
freak
towers.
out about the
I
tower?
hate the tower.
The
Because
tower's a
every
great
time
card.
John draws it, it's a bad day for everybody. All right, we ready? All right, we grab
we
the
go.
top. There we go. There we go. And
Card
we
of
have
the week is dun dun dun. Ace
You
of
flipped it though.
Wands.
That was upside down.
Are we never called reverses or not? So let's go.
All
let's go
right.
upright. Let's go upright.
All right, fine.
let's go upright. Yeah. Okay. Ace
If
of
you're
Wands.
you're
Right
watching
on.
and you're into it,
Wands.
it's going to be a good date.
Yes,
Good date.
has a lot of
That's
potency
like
in
the
that
king
card.
of manifestation, right?
Yeah. Ace of Wands. You're
Yep.
starting out on a new endeavor, new project. A lot of energy, a lot of potential, a lot of potentially sexual energy.
Yeah,
Even for-
I mean
even for Joe.
that's always the joke.
Yes.
I'm
It's always the
I'm
joke.
hoping
I
not
have-
for that because I am at the Grand Lodge of Virginia, so I'm not hoping for any sexual energy whatsoever. Zero.
Some of these amazing ladies that I converse with on tarot pretty regularly. The joke is always like the 3-card spread for the next date, and it'll be like the 3 of Pentacles, the Tower, or they'll be like the 3 of Pentacles, Ace of Wands, and the Tower, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's gonna be the worst."
It's going to be the worst date ever.
Yeah, it's funny, but anyway, that was really cool.
Yeah.
That's great. What deck were you using there, Joe?
I'm using the Esotericon gifted
Ooh.
OG Rider-Waite tarot deck in a funky Alibaba box, because, we didn't go authentic in our swag bags. So, yeah, I think we got these on Alibaba.
They were
Just
nice.
a regular. They were nice,
They're
and
great.
everybody loved them.
I keep them. I keep one in one of my travel bags. In each one of my travel bags.
Have tarot will travel. Yeah, absolutely. If you
That's
guys
right.
dabble,
As tarot will travel.
seriously, keep it with you because you never know. You never know.
Now,
Well, it was fun.
Never know.
I have a gift idea for you, John. I think I'm just going to send it. Yeah.
Put it on Elfster. Yeah.
It'll just be a whole deck of Ace of Wands. That's what you need in your life.
You get an Ace of Wands. You get an Ace of Wands.
Oh, wait a minute. What's really interesting is you are actually at Grand Lodge Sessions, which is overwhelmingly masculine energy.
Right?
Very, very masculine energy. Yes.
You got it. That's the card right there, my man.
The cards don't lie.
Great.
Good stuff.
I just realized I'm drinking out of the cup, so I need to cover the cup when I...
All right. Let's get to this week's topic then. This has been good. We're now switching back to some history, some ritual, some biblical influence. We're going to speak on the character of Zerubbabel. Now, Zerubbabel, very influential in the building of the temple. But wait, you may not have heard his name used in the Blue Lodge degrees because it wasn't the first temple. It was the building of the second temple. So, the second temple of Jerusalem, and which is why you see his
almost
name.
Like 1.5, right?
Yeah. There was maybe some gap years. They were on a break.
There's a really cool nuance here that I'm excited to get into later. But
yeah, I can't wait.
Ooh.
And so let's start off with the biblical account of who is this person? Where are they found in the Bible? And kind of what's said about him from the actual source text before we get into the mythology of the Masonic version of Zerubbabel. Joe, start us off.
Hello. All right. So let's talk about Zerubbabel. So Zerubbabel is a biblical figure found in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, whichever your flavor is. He was, at a very high level, he was a governor during the First Persian Empire's rule over that entire area of the world. And they were at that time, they were known as the Achaemenid Empire, right? This is the same empire that spawned Xerxes, which you saw in the movie 300 with Zack Snyder, a very beautiful, large, 10-foot tall dude with jewelry all over his face.
Nose rings,
same
yes.
people. Nose rings galore. Same peoples. So this was actually, strangely enough, the First Persian Empire was the largest empire that the world had ever seen. It went all the way from Egypt to the Indus Valley, and as north as you could go. So it was only around for about 200 years. And it disappeared when Alexander the Great decided that he wanted that land instead of the Persians. So he took it from them quite easily. So that's who those people were. So Zerubbabel was a governor or a prefect of a small province that included the kingdom of Judah, which at the time was no longer in existence, right? You had the city of Jerusalem, both Judah and Israel, both those two nations that split. If you know your Bible, they split, and one was destroyed earlier, and the last one was destroyed by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, right? So that's what prompted, according to both historical sources and biblical narrative, that's what prompted many, many thousands upon thousands of Jews being led to captivity in the land of Babylon.
Gotcha. So they're still in the Babylonian exile at this point when he's born.
Absolutely. Correct. Yes. He was born in fact, the name Zerubbabel,
right.
If you look at the Hebrew, that means sown from Babel or Babylon. That was the traditional name from it. So was it this person's actual name? Don't know. But, his name does have a meaning that ties him to coming from the land of Babylon. So that's who this person was. So the other interesting thing is that even though he was a governor or moderately influential political figure in somebody else's country, he was also descended of the line of King David. Okay, so he was of the Davidic line. So he definitely had kingly blood, right?
Yeah, I
But
mean
he was
that's a
just
big
never
deal in the Bible, right? If you're checking the
very
whole
much so.
arc throughout the Old and New Testaments, like bloodline of David, you're set for life. You are on the right track.
Well, he got hosed a little bit, right? Because there was no
Oh yeah.
kingdom by the time he was born, right? So there was no place for him to rule. So
Hmm.
he was just a governor. Um,
And his name even means like
so
Prince of something, right?
so the name in Hebrew, I mean, what I researched was um,
That's gonna bother me. Prince of
came
Judah,
sown from
because
Babel.
right, because he's also referenced as Sheshbazzar in the book of Ezra. So they think it's one and the same, or is it a title, or is it the
Two different.
There you
the
go.
nephew of someone? So it's very
There you go.
confusing. But yes, not Zerubbabel, but Sheshbazzar is actually the name means Prince of Judah. So again, that's
Right.
back to the holy bloodline, a royal bloodline. Sorry, and again, with high expectations that he would rule as king. But to your point, didn't really happen. You don't see that happen. It doesn't show up, which is
Yeah.
kind of a
It
letdown, right?
becomes right like it looks as if it's biblical scholars look at it and think, well, technically, he's probably just a governor, if anything. And then what also is really kind of interesting about the whole thing is like recently I was really stoked. We had illustrious brother Steve Harrison come out to our lodge, and he did this great presentation on the three Tyrians. Now, of course, the three Tyrians, and he went over their escape routes, right? And it was really kind of cool. It was a historical look at really what this journey entails. And one of the things that we learned about was that at least in King Solomon's time, so of course Zerubbabel is like much later, not way later, but enough, that the land of Judah is not necessarily, I mean, biblically it's a part of the land, but historically it's the whole region. So I wonder, I'll throw this to Joe just because I know this is part of a lot of the things that you've been studying. Do you see, is that still true in like the time of Zerubbabel, do you know? And it's okay to say you haven't gone that far, right?
No, so that's a great point. And so let's go back now. Now, in the grand scheme of things, for these people, 500 years is kind of a long time, right?
Oh
That's
yeah.
multiple generations upon generations, right? It's not like us that, our life expectancy is closer to 80. You have lots of generations of people between the time of Solomon and Zerubbabel, right? So it is a good historical length of time. But to your point, going back to the first temple period, and that's what we'll start using, first temple and second temple, right? During the time of the first temple, where craft masonry pulls a lot of its allegories from, there is, you're absolutely right. If you look at a map and look at the land of Tyre, it is sitting in the map space of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So it's like, okay, well, who owned that part of the world? Was it King Hiram of Tyre or was it King Solomon? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of gray area there, as well as the other historical places that you were talking about, the journey of the Tyrians. It's a really, if you actually put them out on a map, it's an interesting little journey there. But to your point, so if we're going to the first Persian Empire, there is no Israel, there is no Judah. Those places do not exist anymore, right? They've been completely overrun by the first Persian Empire. You still have the city of Jerusalem, and which we learn about in some Masonic degrees. There are still Jews that lived there even after the time of the Babylonian captivity. There were still people there that never left, that were never taken as slaves, and continued to live as a people, but they were no longer a kingdom. To your point.
Yeah, and I think it's again from a timeline perspective, right? So King Solomon's temple was from about the 10th century BCE, right? And then was
Early 10th century. Yeah.
right, was destroyed in 587, 586 BCE. Okay,
Yep.
so I mean, so it's lasted for 500 years, and then it gets destroyed by the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and then like right about that time is when Zerubbabel's born, and so you have this little gap period between the two temples. I for whatever reason, not knowing my history, I thought it was a much longer period between the two temples, but it was really only about 20 years or something like that before 20, 30 years before the second temple started to be built.
And that's an interesting side note as we start to get to some of these, and this is what I find fascinating about this type of history, is that as you get to some of these biblical figures that show up in extra biblical sources, like in Babylonian texts or in Persian documents and things like that, the time
Apocrypha.
frames are really small. They're not big time frames. We're outside of the time of legend, where you have
Right,
people that
right.
are more archetypes than actual people. People like Zerubbabel, the people that came after, the Hasmoneans, things like that. As we start to get closer to the time of the Romans, they're real people. They existed, because they show up outside of the Hebrew Bible. So it's very likely that they were real people and not just, again, going to like the time of Genesis and things
So
like that, where it's more,
are you
ooh,
telling
what?
me are you telling me that like the older we get, there's a likelihood of the character not being real and just being a representation of an idea or a thing?
Uh, Number one, I hate you. And number two, these are my personal opinions and
Well,
my personal opinions
I know.
alone. So thank you for getting me in
so
trouble. But
yeah.
but if you go back through, so a generic brushstroke is fair to say that the older back in time you go and the less corroborating sources you have, the more likelihood that you're talking about archetypal figures as opposed to
Yeah.
actual people that lived and died in a certain
These
date
were
range in
moral
history.
stories, right? So you want the characters in the moral story to exhibit these characteristics or be these archetypes, like you said, that fulfill a specific message, right? So
And this
it,
was the way they did this too. I
it
mean,
was
like
always the way they did it. Exactly.
historically speaking, the story conveyed a value which was much more important than whether or not the people existed or the thing actually
Well,
happened.
look at the way the synoptic gospels were written too, right? It's the same events told very differently because of the message of the author to get a different point across.
Yes, to all the things. But yes, so great. We skated out of that one unscathed. I love it. But yeah, to your point, getting back to Zerubbabel. So again, there is corroborating evidence for his existence. Now, was that his name? We don't know, right? But his name definitely has meaning, and we can use that meaning to impart moral lessons, especially when we get into the Masonic context. So, but let's get back to him. He was of the line of David, never became king because there was no kingdom, right? And nor really is there ever again, right? Even when we get to the time of the Herods and stuff like that, the kingdom of Israel is basically gone by now, right? And it doesn't come back. Um, so his grandfather I think was like the second to last king of Judah. And then there was one more king after that, and then you had the Babylonians, and then the Babylonians got taken over by the Persians. So now we're living in a Persian empire, right? And Zerubbabel and all the tens of thousands of Jews that lived in captivity grew up in a Babylonian/Persian society, right? And again, remember, you got to think about the generations. Like we consider a generation 20 years. So you had at least three full generations of people that all they knew was Babylon, right? Babylon and Persia. So now where he shows up in quite a few places in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, whichever you're looking at. But not to the detail that we would think, for such an important figure. He's referenced quite a few times, but there's only one or two places where it's really fleshed out who he was and what he did. So we have, some of the prophetic books like the book of Haggai and the book of Zechariah. They make mention of who Zerubbabel was. And he's usually, and this is where we start to get into some of the really important Jewish history. He's almost always mentioned with Joshua. So you have your
Right.
king and your high priest, and you start to see this traveling pair along. But more times than not, he's mentioned not just by himself, but with Joshua. Um,
BFFs.
BFFs forever, love it.
Mm-hmm.
So then we get to the book of Ezra, which is canonical in most sources, where he's actually makes that journey out of Babylon back to Jerusalem and starts to work on the second temple, right? So that's where we get one of the more comprehensive stories. He's mentioned once in the book of Nehemiah. He's mentioned in First Chronicles, and this is where it gets super interesting when we're talking about lineages and things like that. So there is a lineage that goes back all the way to the first kings of Israel that includes Zerubbabel, but it's different than the lineages we have for Jesus in both Matthew and Luke. So for those who are Christian or read the Christian Bible, Luke and Matthew both start with the genealogies of Jesus, right? Zerubbabel is in both of them. But Zerubbabel in Matthew and Luke have different parents and different children. So he's inserted in different places. And it's also different than what we find in the Hebrew Bible, where his lineage is. So
that's a fun rabbit hole to go down, because if you ever try to look
so,
at genealogy in the Bible, just do some YouTube searches to see people who've tried to draw these elaborate family trees and try to explain the differences between them. It's fascinating. So yeah, I think that's just another little rabbit hole for research for people to go down.
So this is another great plug for, spend the $19.99 and go to ancestry.com. Don't try to do it on your own, because it's going to be wrong, especially in 1,000 years. Pay the money, send your DNA. Ancestry.com is not sponsoring the show, but leave it to the experts. Don't do it on your own, because it'll get fudgy. So yes, but yeah. So let's get back to where he shows up in text. Now, the most interesting place he shows up in text, which is where a lot of Masonic degrees actually pull their legends from, is actually in one of my favorite words to say, apocryphal or non-canonical text. Yeah, nice. Super interesting. So there are stories. Look at RJ smiling. He likes when I say that. So there is a book of scripture known as First Esdras, okay, that shows up in the Septuagint. Okay, it's in the Greek Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of the Bible during the time of the reign of Alexander the Great, or when the Ptolemies took over Egypt. They brought a whole bunch of Jewish scribes to the land of the city of Alexandria, and they said, "Write the Bible, write it for us so we can read it, because we love to read, but just in Greek, not in Hebrew." So they did, and so that is one of the more comprehensive translations of the Hebrew Bible was done in Greek. And there is a book in that Bible known as First Esdras. Now, First Esdras does not exist in most of your Western Christian Bibles. It's considered apocryphal or non-canonical. One place where it does show up is in the Ethiopic Bible. So in the African land of Ethiopia, which got their own stream of Christianity, much different than the West did, than Greece or Rome.
Still has the Ark of the Covenant, by the way.
They have the Ark of the Covenant. It's on the History Channel. Yep. The History Channel. Yeah. But First Esdras has this really complex story about Zerubbabel and the king at the time, Darius the First, and the stories known historically as the Tale of the Three Guardsmen, or the Contest of Darius. And again, not to spoil any Masonic degrees, this is where basically it's a contest between some advisors of King Darius, asking which one is strongest. And the original three choices are women, wine, and king. So which of these three is strongest? So it's a contest. It's like a philosophical contest, and they all have basically
good responses to all of those.
Great responses, and they feed off each other. And then Zerubbabel comes in at the end and just razzle dazzles them with the right answer, which is none of those three.
Boom!
So, but again, it's what I find super interesting is that we pull a lot of stuff from this book that is, again, not considered canon in most of the faith systems that Freemasonry started in. So kudos to them for stepping outside their comfort zone and pulling stuff from places that are interesting. So that historically is who Zerubbabel was.
So then he, while governor, it takes on the responsibility, right, of rebuilding the temple, or starting to build Temple 2, the second temple, right, during this time frame. And people wonder, like, well, what's going on, like, historically? And some people say, well, because there's other fighting going on, he kind of uses it as like a pet project on the side, because like, who's going to bother him if he's going to, there's other things to worry about. So he's taking this on as a project. And so he becomes this character associated with the piety, with the bloodline, and the rank of governor to start this project, and by therefore starting the building of the temple again must be blessed by God, right? In fact, I think there's another little story about the signet ring, which is interesting too, where in the book of Haggai, where it said that in this day, say the Lord of hosts, I will take thee, O Zerubbabel, my servant, the son of Shealtiel, saith the Lord, and I will make thee as a signet, like a signet ring, like a ring, for I've chosen thee, saith the Lord of hosts. And so everyone's like, what's with the rings? Like, is he? The Lord is saying, I'm going to take you as a ring. You know, okay, now we're getting to like the metaphor land, and so a lot of scholarship is done around this quote, because who wears rings? Like, you know, the priests and the and Joe, lots of rings, and so
Shablam.
as a metaphor, right? You know,
As a metaphor, God wants to wear Zerubbabel like a ring.
Exactly, that he is inspired.
But it's a signet ring. It's not just a ring, you know, like Joe goes on Etsy and buys some rings. It's a signet ring. And what is a signet ring? It's your family crest. It's your ring that identifies you as a person within a family line, right? So it has a very specific meaning. We could probably have a whole show just on that alone, the symbolism of that. But yeah, so he does say that, and it's pretty explicit what type of ring he needs to be.
Right. So that's either way you look at it, it's like he's got God's blessing as he's going forward and leading the building of the second temple. Now, which is interesting because there's really not a lot of detail about what he actually did, other than he was kind of in charge. That's it. The Bible doesn't go into any more detail about anything specifically that he did, but was there during the construction of the second temple, and again was God's like go-to guy.
So yeah, there's two specific things that they talk about in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, and those are that he led the first wave of exiles back into Jerusalem, right? And they have a specific number there. I think it's like 42,000 something. I don't know it offhand, but he returns them to Jerusalem. But again, there's people living there. There's people that have lived 3 whole generations, not knowing who the hell these weirdos are from Babylon and their weird language and their weird earrings and nose rings and all that stuff, you know, because everybody looks like a Zack Snyder movie at this point in time. And it wasn't an easy, like, hey, you know, it wasn't like Moses, you know, showing up to the border of the promised land and saying, hey, we're going to build a temple here or a tabernacle. No, he had to actually argue with people. They're like, hey, what are you doing here? And he's like, I'm coming to rebuild the temple. And they're like, we don't want a temple. Like, we're fine. We're good. We don't need it. So, you know, there was a lot of that going around. But the second place where he's mentioned is that him and Joshua actually built and consecrated the altar of the Lord. So they did get far enough that they built an altar within the confines of the temple in order to do what they do best and sacrifice and pray, right? So
RJ, talk about this other little gap thing that you wanted to talk about, this 1.5.
Right. So
temple.
what's interesting is the history of the temple over time. But going back to Zerubbabel, you know, after he gives the King Darius, this awesome answer, he imbues him with, you know, kind of like a warrant to go and to travel and to go back to the land and to build this temple and start, you know, at least in legend. And so he's building this temple. And along the way, as Joe points out, he says that he's got the right to do this. They don't know necessarily historically if he did, but maybe he's thinking Darius is just so caught up in everything else he can just get away with it. And then, or maybe he does have a warrant to do this. And while he's doing it, Samaritans, or like people who aren't them, right, come over and they say, hey, we'll help you. And actually, Zerubbabel's like, no, you can't do it. It has to be only us. And so they're kind of like maybe offended by this. And so they start spreading rumors that Zerubbabel is actually building fortifications and walls. and they get these rumors back to Darius.
He's got to be up to no good.
He's got to be up to no good. And then Darius is like, what the heck? But regarding the temple is it's really supposed to be that so the first temple, which is like major magnificent or whatever, right? And we all know it's a smaller temple with the huge courtyards and all of this great stuff.
And
And
pillars.
then, yeah, right. And then what happens is you get the how do you want to say it? Like they start to build this second temple that he's building, and then later on Herod takes over and builds on top of that. So it's really pretty interesting. It's like Temple 1.5, and they say it takes 20 years, and maybe there's a 15-year gap between the starting of building
Right.
the temple and then not like and then actually getting back to it. So there's a lot of delay. There's a lot of I don't know what you would call it, like tribal espionage going on, but also as Zerubbabel is really trying to keep the building of this thing like sanctimonious, you know, by only allowing the chosen people to rebuild it. And so, yeah, I just find it fascinating, you know. So it's really like the first temple, which really is kind of the second, because you have the temple and the tabernacle in the wilderness first.
Right.
Then you've got the temple. Then you've got this one that Zerubbabel helps with, and then you've got, of course, Herod's temple, which is then raised in like 70 CE.
I'll see your half
and then-
temple and raise you one more, because what happened to the artifacts in the destruction of the first temple? So
They were
there
taken
are
back to Babylon.
well, there are some theories that a temporary temple was set up to house some of the artifacts, like kind of nearby around the spot, right? So, you know, so they had to stay there, or there was, there's some activity going on in that 20, 30 year period. So, yeah.
Well, to that point, and going back to what Robert was talking about, let's talk about that piece you mentioned about the Samaritans is hyper important, right? Because we hear, most people who are Christians, they hear the word Samaritan, they think of the couple of stories in the New Testament, and that's it. But who were these people? These people were basically Israelites that were left behind after the Babylonian captivity, right? So these are people who,
Oh,
it was a
interesting.
subset. Yeah, they came from certain northern tribes out of the 12 tribes, right? And for the most part, they had this nature about them that they're like, well, we're the true Israelite religion because you guys went to Babylon and you got bamboozled by, fancy clothes and nose rings and all this stuff. But so we're like the OG stuff, and you guys are players and fakers and stuff like that. And that animosity exists for hundreds upon hundreds of years, right? Like it's this, like, when you get into the stories in the Gospels about the Samaritans, they're treated with scorn and disdain, right? Like the Jews and the Samaritans do not mix with one another, until JC comes along and says, "Hey, everybody get along." But
Help me out with something, and this is going to be more historical, and this is a real question, not a plant question. I often wonder how many people
thanks.
watching. I often wonder, like how many people watching go, does RG have these set up to just ask Joe? Because he's like,
Yes.
yeah. No, I don't. These are legit questions. So my question is, given some of these couple degrees in Freemasonry, right? Like there's the one where, of course, Zerubbabel answers this question. And then, maybe a follow-up episode to what we could do here is to talk about another Scottish Rite degree where we have another a piece where Daniel interprets the dream for Nebuchadnezzar. And he's also tempted with the treasures, right? This is why I started thinking about it because, John, you mentioned the treasures, the candlesticks, and the Ark of the Covenant is one of these, and all this gold.
Right.
Help me remember what happened first. Did Daniel interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the Babylonian king, and then like travel out? and come back with some Jews from captivity, or is that only Zerubbabel who did this? I'm having a hard time remembering.
So Daniel was early on in the Babylonian captivity, right? He was one of the exilees. He was taken from Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, right? And thrown in jail multiple times because he doesn't, change who he prays to and things like that, or pray in the way that they want. So he is given the gift of prophecy, and he does use it to, um, interpret dreams and things like that. And when Nebuchadnezzar II, who's not an awesome dude, right? He's a bad guy. He's not a great guy.
Right.
He's not one of those. He's not one of those anti-hero people. He's a bad dude. But the bulk of the stories of Daniel that is your prototypical best example of apocalyptic literature, right? Like all the stuff that that shows up in the book of Daniel is pure apocalyptic literature.
Mm-hmm.
And it's written around the time when this once proud group of people chosen by God basically got their asses kicked, right? And got all their land taken away, and all their holy relics are stolen, and they're basically down to nothing, and they go and be slaves. And so it's early on in the captivity. Now, it's not fleshed out in the Bible what happens to Daniel at the end, but they do mention his tomb. So if you look at the dates of when Nebuchadnezzar reigned and the things that Daniel supposedly did, it does bleed into the time of the Persian Empire, right? So Daniel was most likely alive when the transition came between Babylon was taken over by Persia. So, and there's references to his tomb, and I think if you look up somewhere, you can find where his tomb actually is. I think it's in the city of Susa, but we don't know exactly what happened to him according to biblical sources. But to answer your question, he was early on. Zerubbabel came much later, and he was born in Persia, as opposed to Daniel, who was in exile.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Let's fast forward to Masonry now. So we've got the long assorted history of Zerubbabel, and when you're using an allegory of King Solomon's Temple to be the foundation of the Blue Lodge degrees, and then therefore have the sequel include the rebuilding of the temple, right, in the appendant bodies, you're going to see Zerubbabel show up. Spoiler alert for those who haven't joined the Scottish Rite or York Rite. Yes, Zerubbabel shows up in both of those, because they at least each have different versions of the story of the rebuilding of the temple.
Yeah, I mean, the York Rite just ripped it off from Scottish Rite.
Well, there's details. Pike would agree with you on that one. So in fact, you see Zerubbabel as the character show up with some speaking parts in different degrees to include, but not be limited to, the Royal Arch degree, the Illustrious Order of the Red Cross, the Order of the Knight Masons, and the 15th degree and 16th degree of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite. So again, this is right after the 14th degree, which is a really special Scottish Rite degree.
Y'all get that Illustrious Red Cross degree? I don't know that one.
That's in Knights Templar.
Is it? I thought it was
Order
like
of the Red Cross?
Yeah.
Cross, like.
That's the first one you get. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? Wow, I don't remember that.
We'll teach you offline.
We'll do some more degrees for you. There you go.
I want to take up the rest of the time talking about. No,
let's talk about that degree. I want that one.
So just to segue into that and help refresh Robert's memory. So you end the Royal Arch system of degrees with Zerubbabel, right? He shows up in the Royal Arch degree, and that degree talks about the rebuilding of the Second Temple, and that's where a lot of stuff from First Esdras, the names of people and stuff like that, you get from there, and you don't get it from other parts of canonical scripture.
All Ezra all the time.
All Ezra all the time. I'm not going to read anything else. Anyway, so then we transition to after you become a Royal Arch Mason, then they most places will slip in the cryptic degrees where you go back to the time of Hiram, right? Because we can't do anything linearly. We have to just skip around a lot. And then so then you get a little bit more Hiram there, and then you're done with that, and then you move into the Knights Templar degree, and the Order of the Red Cross. It's not a degree; it's an order. Goes back to the time of Zerubbabel. So we transition out of the time of Jewish captivity, and we start to move more towards, the rise of Roman Christianity. And you start to do that as you travel through the orders of Knights Templar. But that Order of Red Cross degree is all about the story that's found in First Esdras, which is the contest of Darius and its result.
So, which is interesting because obviously Pike has given speaking parts to Zerubbabel, but yet in Morals and Dogma, really doesn't mention Zerubbabel at all. Even though it's a main character in the 15th and 16th degree, and so what I find fascinating about how does this translate Masonically is what is Zerubbabel supposed to represent? Because remember, we're not supposed to confuse the symbol for the thing it represents. And here in the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, I think there was a good summary from Rex Hutchins in the Bridge to Light, which is kind of the summary of Morals and Dogma, to which he says, and I think it's a really good summary of the spirit of Zerubbabel, which is, to the Mason, Zerubbabel is the type of leader who perseveres, encourages the disinherited, cheers the timid, incites the indolent, forces the apathetic and reluctant, and has incorruptible fidelity to honor and duty.
And truth.
Truth is a big thing for Zerubbabel. Really is. And Brother Anderson went further when writing the Constitutions of Freemasons to refer to Zerubbabel as the, quote, General Master Mason of the Jews.
Oh, Anderson.
Anderson likes to stir the pot a little bit, but there it is. So, again, it's not so much the historic, biblical, literal version of Zerubbabel. It's now converted to this mythology in the Masonic context of what does it mean to be a leader of the rebuilding of a temple, and what is that? What virtues does that extol?
There's a bit too that I think is important that I included in the show art, right? And I don't know people who may have remembered it or whatever, but there's a bit about the sword and the trowel. And so the whole bit about the sword and the trowel is really what sticks out to me in a Masonic context. Zerubbabel for me is more of a vehicle to which you can give these lessons and put them on there so that you can watch it happen, right? And this whole thing about the sword and the trowel was that Zerubbabel is said to have told these people to always have a sword and trowel so that you can build with one hand while defending with the other. And this really has some interesting connotations, I think, when you think about the overarching nature of, in particular, the Scottish Rite. When you look at the Scottish Rite, whether northern or southern jurisdiction, there is this overarching theme of, like being part of the civic nature of freedom and to build up, the country and to be strong and to defend the things. And it is interesting to note that perhaps when these were written, I don't know if exactly Pike is thinking about this, but certainly think about how this could have been seen coming out of, say, the Civil War, right? To build with one hand and yet defend with the other, and how this might all mix together. But I tend to see it even today in almost not a political arena, but in a civic arena, that you are about building up men while defending the freedoms that we have and that we've continued to build, so that they don't get destroyed by those three Tyrians of fanaticism and so on and so forth. But some observation.
No, that was. I mean, that I want to go run around with a flag and just punch people in this hotel lobby right now. You got me all hard charged, man. But
this is Sparta.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch some Zack Snyder when we're done, and embarrass myself. No, but you kind of touched on something that really piqued my curiosity. It's a much different lesson to tell um, than the old adage of turning your swords into plowshares, right? It's like you got to be ready to do both at the same time, right? And you got to continue to be that type of person that can do both, right? I can either create or defend if needed. It's not, that old adage of sword into plowshares is, hey, I'm done doing my thing. I'm going to go be a farmer now. And, that way of life is done, as opposed to what you're saying, Robert. And unless I'm putting words in your mouth, it's no, you have to be the type of person that can do both. And that is it's a civic duty
Right.
of all good men.
It kind of reminds me, there's a couple phrases that I'm going to just do a horrible job of reassembling, which basically says something about being a peaceful man means that it's not that you are pacifist, it's that you have the ability to be violent, but you are choosing, right, to be peaceful. And so it's having the ability, right? It's the warrior monk. It's being able to go out in the garden but be ready to kill if called upon at war. So it's balancing both of those, and that's an interesting trait. I mean, just to step back and go meta for a second, right? That is an interesting archetype for a man in the 21st century to try to be able to hold too. Is that to be a master of all domains, right? So to be able to write poetry, to have a garden, and be physically fit, be able to defend yourself and your property, and just be able to balance those two seemingly opposite polarities.
The warrior poet, man.
Right.
That was a motif in many, many different peoples across time. It wasn't. I mean, let's bring my favorite Mason in the world, George Washington. I mean, he many
Obviously.
quotes about
Yes.
obviously OG
Obviously.
favorite. He had cool aprons. He had numerous quotes talking about that. Things like to be prepared for war. One of the most effective ways is to preserve peace, to be prepared for war, or in time of peace, prepare for war, things like that. Von Clausewitz, all the great thinkers of uh, military strategy always had that mentality about them. Sun Tzu, many quotes that ring similar to what you're talking about. So
Absolutely.
it's not something that just Pike came up with.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1800s, it's a
Came out of nowhere.
long-standing truth.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, let's get to the final question. And so this one's going to be an easy one. What is your favorite aspect or characteristic of Zerubbabel as it's portrayed throughout history and mythology? And we'll start with Robert Johnson.
I hate you.
No one likes to follow Robert.
No one does. Everybody hates
Mostly
it.
because I'm farting most of the time, and then if you're behind me, it's just not a good.
Don't go in an elevator with Robert.
No.
While you guys were talking about this, I just have to mention it. Maybe I'm pulling strings here, but I think whatever. Let's use my imagination. The whole story of Zerubbabel is really interesting because when you started talking about him as like coming out of nowhere and seemingly disappears into nowhere, there are some thoughts that maybe he dies in a skirmish against the Persians or the Babylonians again, or perhaps he. I think they said that in the Hebrew scriptures he is assumed to have gone back to Babylon and passed there. But just the way he like comes in out of nowhere and then is just granted this, he's God's signet ring, right? It reminded me of the Rise of Skywalker. Like all of a sudden, Rey is like, I'm Skywalker, but I don't. It was just bizarre. Anyway, so favorite aspects of Zerubbabel, I think I just like this. I like the motif of the sword and trowel. You can finger shake at me. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. It's just where my mind went because I'm goofy. But anyway, I just like this idea of the sword and trowel because as you guys were talking about it, there has never been a time in history where, peace doesn't last forever. There's always going to be a despot who's born. There's always going to be somebody ready to tear it down. And the people need to be able to understand their ability to build and to defend. And it's a constant thing, right? Like, when you think about it in terms of the legal system and how we battle every day for civics, right? Like, every day you have people that you've elected to office to represent your values, and they are going to war. And when they are meeting in the middle, potentially they have defended something and yet are building a relationship, right? To take one step forward instead of maybe they're taking 3 steps forward and 1 step back, a little compromise or something. But that's the way I see it. I think I look at it as an allegory for modern civics and political movements. But I rather enjoy the story, and I hope we do another one of these in the future. And I'd love to do Daniel and talk about the dreams.
Nice. We're going to be a Bible channel after this.
And I have to say, the last thing I'll mention is I gotta plug Double Eagle Con, November 19th, 2022. I got 5 new speakers coming to the Valley of Chicago, and all-day event. Really great speakers. I'm excited for everybody, but Robert William Marshall's got one called Pelicans and Bazooka, which just sounds like an insane title for a presentation. So anyway, tickets are $50, and it's all day. You get breakfast and lunch, and you'll be out of there by 5-6 o'clock at night. Go home and tuck your kids in bed. So it's a good Saturday. I hope to see you guys there.
Nice, awesome, thank you. Over to you, Joe. Favorite aspect of Zerubbabel?
Well, not his appearance in Star Wars, as Robert was talking about. That is not my favorite.
Zerubbabel Skywalker.
Zerubbabel Skywalker.
Everybody's a damn Skywalker by the end of that movie. No. So the thing I like about him is, I'm actually going to take a little piece of what Robert said because it was a great idea. But he is this archetypal figure. He is essentially a lost king, right? And we gloss over that fact. He is of the line of David and Solomon and all these kings who reigned through the kingdom of Israel. Then it split off, and then they got captured by Nebuchadnezzar, and so he basically was this king in exile, right? And I think the early scribes of the Hebrew Bible understood that and made it so that you could at least understand that this person really was someone of import who basically got a raw deal, but he gets to at least fulfill a piece of his story and gets to go rebuild, the temple that was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. So, I've always found that an interesting aspect. And then obviously the contest of Darius is that's just a fantastic story with a whole lot of moral lessons for people. So those are my 2 favorite things.
Nice. Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Which is cool because we all have a different facet that we're looking at this character through. And for me, I really like the sense of duty, right? That again, he had this responsibility, right, as governor, as being part of that bloodline, and so good things were destined for him, and yet he had this sense of obligation, of duty to his people, to kind of rebuild in this transition period, right, where they're coming back from exile. And I really like that that archetype of as a leader, right, that his job is to rebuild, and leadership is hard when you are picking up the pieces, right? It's very easy to lead when things are going great. There's a lot of transitioning that was going on at this time frame for him in this period of history, and so what you don't hear through while you're trying to pick up where he's interspersed throughout the different books of the Bible, is this character, this person who actually has to unify a nation, has to unify people who are trying to get back home and rebuild. And I think that's just it's an interesting character that we should aspire towards to emulate. So that's what I like the most out of Zerubbabel, and what he brings for the again, the further light that you get in Masonry of after you've accomplished working on your temple, what's next. So that's what I got, and I appreciate getting back to the swing of things, seeing you all. You guys are awesome. Joe, have a fun time at the Grand Annual Communications, and look with your little happy orange card. I know you're excited.
Go vote.
Go vote. Democracy rocks. All right, so
Democracy rocks.
I want to thank you guys very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.